Molweni, Sanibonani, Dumelang. My name is Kululwa Mutwa and I am your host on Property Market Moves. I am particularly excited about today's conversation. I am sitting in studio with Zahra Rawjee. She is one part of a sister duo that owns Uzenzele Holdings, and they focus on capital raising and transaction advisory. Now, they have worked with over 2,000 SMMEs and have helped to raise capital over 53.3 million and overall over 2 billion in funds raised for SMMEs. And I think that is a powerful conversation to have. Now, in this podcast, we aim to educate, inform, and inspire you along your property journey. And today, I think we're stretching it to business in general. Welcome, Zahra. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you for being with us. I'm so excited because, one of the biggest, I think, solutions to what our economy is facing today is really growing the SMME economy. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. But before we dive into that, tell us about who Zahra is and Uzenzele Holdings.
Who Zahra is, and I'm going to speak in the context of my business and not give you my life story at this point in time.
Yeah.
But I am a co-founder and director of Uzenzele Holdings. It was founded by my sister and I in 2010. We got really involved full-time in the business in 2012. And our passion is to help businesses raise the capital they need and to take them on the journey of understanding what that means and how to become ready to raise capital. And that comes from our history. We come from family business, as is the case with many Indian families in South Africa. We come from trading. Our family comes from trading. My grandfather started a small food distribution, a small spaza shop, really, essentially, in Marabastad in Pretoria in 1937. Ultimately, that grew and grew. My father and his brothers built that to a substantial company. And in 2012, by the time we closed the business, and I'll tell you a bit about that in a moment, we were the third largest private food distributor in the country.
Wow.
Supplying food service, hospitality, across the board, restaurants, hotels, prisons, governments, institutions, etc.
Yeah.
So in terms of why we do what we do and where Uzenzele comes from is that while the family business grew over the years, over 75 years, into this large company turning over hundreds of millions of rands a year, that happened organically. The business owners grew the business, invested in it. But it wasn't necessarily done strategically or with a view to how to raise capital, how to be ready to engage the market if necessary. And unfortunately, in around 2010, things got a little bit tricky cash flow-wise. The business was struggling a little bit. My father said to Nadia and I, I've given you a good education. I've sent you to university. Help me out. Go out into the market and find these billions of rands that are apparently available for SMEs and Black-owned businesses in South Africa. And so that's what we did. We started engaging with all types of funders, from your commercial lenders. I mean, we were one of the good clients with our bank, long relationship there. We engaged with our ESD. Sorry, let me go back there. So we really got into the market. We started engaging with various funders, from your commercial banks where we had long-standing relationships, good relationships, to our suppliers in their ESD programs, to government institutions, looking to raise capital for the business. And what we determined was, despite this business being a very well-established business, a very well-known business, it had a good reputation, been around for so long, anyone in hospitality and food knew the company. That reputation wasn't sufficient to raise capital. Right? The company wasn't structured to raise capital. It was being run like a family business still, even though it was large. And so what we determined was, well, we went down this road. Eventually, we weren't able to raise the capital we wanted, despite promises, which is something that happens with financial institutions.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit more this, give us a little bit more that, let's talk about it, etc. But at the end of the day, we just didn't have the compliance and the elements in place for them to say, yes, we will fund you, right? And so what we learned through that process of about 2 years of engaging with the financial market is that at the end of the day, you need to be ready to access capital. And getting ready to access capital is not necessarily something easy. It's a process. It requires a substantial amount of work. And there's a lot of compliance and requirements behind it.
Yeah.
And so when we closed the business in 2012, Nadia and I looked at each other and we said, well, what do we want to do now? And we decided that we'd spend so much time learning about what it takes to raise capital in the market. And we understood intrinsically what SMEs struggle with in terms of raising capital because we experienced it firsthand.
Yeah.
So we said, let's actually set up a company to do this. And that's sort of the genesis of Uzenzele. It's why we do what we do, and why a big focus for us is not just about getting the funding. It's about ensuring that the whole process towards accessing that funding is well planned, it's well structured, so that the application is successful for funding, as well as the implementation of those funds is successful.
And you've touched on a number of issues, which are then critical, for us to dive into. You spoke about compliance, right? Because when the funders are looking at the business holistically, they look at how it is structured. They don't just look at the track record or the brand that you've had over these years. So if you take us a little into that, what should startup businesses be cognizant of, and certainly SMME companies, for them to be fundable?
There's so many things to consider, but the main first level compliance to be done needs to be done. And that's the simple stuff for every company. And I call it stuff because that's what it is. It's the stuff. It's the things companies don't like doing. It's the things a lot of SMEs, when they're starting out and when they're quite small, forego doing because it's a bit of a pain.
Yeah.
It takes time. It requires a little bit of investment. And as an SME, you want to put your money in places that you feel are going to be going to give you more of a return in the moment, if I can put it that way. But your compliance is, your basic things, your company registrations, your VAT registrations, be tax compliance. Ensure that, if you've got creditors that you're paying them, if you've got debtors that they're paying you.
Yes.
Don't run your personal life from your business account. One of the biggest ones, because. And look, it's not to say that funders don't understand that. But when you go to raise funding, you now have to go through the whole process of extracting that and then showing where's the business without all of those elements in it. Pay yourself a salary. And just in paying yourself a salary, you're also showing that you can comply with things like PAYE, with UIF, because those are all compliance mechanisms that show your ability to run successfully or to follow the rules, to do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
So, that's your first level. In terms of your annual financial statements, also really important, have them done and understand them. And this is a really tricky thing for SMEs. And I completely understand the perspective of, we get an accountant because we don't know how to do accounting as SMEs. You get your accountant, they do your books for you. But ensure you engage with that accountant. Ensure that you understand what they've put into your books and that it is correct. Because that track record is going to speak to whether or not you've been running your business well.
Yeah.
Right? What those numbers show. And it's going to allow you to ensure that you are running your business well as an SME. So I'd say just high level, those are some of the critical things to keep in mind. Of course, different institutions have different requirements in terms of compliance. And if you're going to go to government for funding, definitely tax compliance is an absolute requirement. BE and BE scores. So understanding the difference between Black ownership and a BE score. This often is something that businesses don't understand, and an assumption that Black ownership is always enough. It's not necessarily, especially for your larger businesses. turning over 50 million rand, you're now a generic.
Yeah.
You're not going to automatically get a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 even. We know black-owned businesses that are turning over well over 50 million rand. They're not making a level 4.
Yeah.
Because all they have is black ownership. They're not meeting the other requirements of the scorecard. So understanding these elements are important. And I think there's this balance you need to strike between determining how much are you going to spend in compliance at the beginning versus also then going, okay, I want to go down a funding journey, right? Understanding at that point in time what needs to be done is also important. So while things might not be in place from the beginning, before going to a funder, at that point, engaging and ensuring that you're going to start putting your ducks in a row. It is always difficult to fix things and to start things right from the beginning. But before going to a funder, at least put those things in perspective, correct what needs to be corrected, structure properly what needs to be structured so that when you go to the funder, you're showing the right picture of your business.
And I know that for large businesses that has, a governance structure, a board of directors that they are accountable to, it's easy to then have, not have the business run as an extension of self, right? As a family. But when you look at the SMME businesses that you've worked with, how prevalent is the indication of working, that blurring of the lines between self and business, especially in terms of how we utilize our funds, taking business money to pay for something in the household, whether or not you're taking a salary from that business. How often do you find that there's a blurring of the lines where there is no governance structure in place?
We see that more with your smaller startup businesses.
Yeah.
Most businesses tend to recognize the requirement to separate self from business after they've started turning over a fair amount of money.
Okay.
I mean, there are certain things that it makes sense to run through the business, and that's perfectly fine. But there are things that don't make sense to run through a business. I mean, if you're running your car through the business, fine. You need a vehicle to get around. You own the business. That's not the end of the world. But your child's school fees or your groceries, that doesn't make sense to run through the business. So don't. And it's not a difficult thing to do, really, to not run that through the business.
Yeah.
It's just a mindset to be cognizant of the fact that a business is separate from the self. And that often comes when setting up a business account. So what we often find also, small businesses are running their books or their transactions through their personal accounts. That really doesn't help anything because that is a complete mix. So separate your business account from your personal account.
And when we bring it back then to the property sector or the built environment industry, which is a space that our member base, plays at, how have you found sustainability in those businesses, especially in the last couple of years, with the economy struggling? Have we found businesses still growing sustainably, or have we found that there's, a little bit of difficulty?
I think it's really about opportunity and viability at the end of the day. There are businesses that are struggling. There are others that are doing extremely well, So, I mean, we all know that after COVID, for example, the office space in terms of property really took a knock, right? And it continues to take a knock because hybrid working is still in place. People are realizing they don't necessarily need that much office space or such fancy spaces or such big spaces, whatever the case might be. But at the end of the day, it's really about looking at where the opportunities lie, where there is a need. And where there is a need, there will always be growth, there will always be opportunity.
Sure.
You just look at the built environment or the property sector and things like student accommodation, things like gap housing, and then your bigger infrastructure type builds. That doesn't go away. That continues and is required. So there's always going to be opportunity. It's about identifying and ensuring, and this is a big part of raising capital, is ensuring that viability is there.
And in terms of the work that you do, you in our space, then you mostly focused in the manufacturing side of it. What indicators is that showing in terms of, construction activity that is still happening, around the country? Are we still seeing a demand?
Absolutely, we are still seeing a demand. I think the interesting thing is within the construction space, a lot of the materials required to construct are heavy, are bulky. And so those are being manufactured locally, right? So there is that opportunity always. And I engage with businesses that reach out to us for funding, and we see businesses in certain of the construction material space, equipment rental, that sort of thing. They're doing well. There's always a shortage of cash, so they're reaching out to us and asking us to assist them raise capital. But at the end of the day, we do see that if a business is well run, is engaged in the market, is providing a good service, and that's really important at the end of the day. You need to become invaluable to your clients, offer a good service, offer a good product.
Yes.
And generally speaking, that's going to lead down a road of opportunity, greater and greater opportunity.
Now, working in a space of capital raising, you're naturally exposed to, to finance all around. Whilst you might not be in, the space of equity, raising, is one of the areas that we see a lot of struggle with, Black businesses in particular, where they will be able to access capital, but have an equity portion, that they are required to raise, which they don't have. Is there room for Uzenzele to probably play in that space?
So I think that the important thing is understanding where a business is at and what sort of transaction we're looking at. I mean, not all transactions are the same. Not all businesses are the same. Not all opportunities are the same. And certainly with regards to equity, this is a problem, not just in the property space, but across the board in terms of raising capital, is that equity contribution that funders are looking for. We do see this to be a struggle. Unfortunately, I don't have a straight answer to that. I wish I did, because, gosh, it would make life a lot easier for many of our clients. But there are funding organizations that do look at how they can come in to bridge that gap. So, for example, DBSA, they have a option to provide funding as well as take equity in the project. Of course, again, they need to see the value and viability in doing so. And they're not the only ones. There are other institutions that do that. What's really important is to understand what the mandate of a funder is, and to see whether or not that's an option that they're offering. If it is, certainly something to look at. For businesses that already have some portfolio, that becomes easier, of course, to get an equity partner in. But property is a space that tends to be focused on by other people that are interested in property. It's not just any equity, any investor that's going to come in and say, yes, I'm interested in joining you as a partner in this project. So, I don't know what the answer is. Unfortunately, but I think somewhat thinking outside the box needs to happen, and certainly engaging with the greater property arena to see how that can be done. I don't know what can be done in terms of how REITs could come to the table, or and create something similar to the AITF that the automotive industry has, which is the Automotive Industry Transformation Fund, where the big OEMs, your Mercedes, BMW, Ford, etc., are contributing funds towards that
raising a kitty for
it. And the purpose of those funds is to assist, SMEs in the automotive sector. So, I mean, is there not that the AITF provides that equity check, but there are different ways to look at it. Property is an interesting sector, though, and I think interestingly is that balance between wealth creation and opportunity, economic opportunity, and finding that space where the two can work together. A lot of government institutions don't really fund property because it's considered wealth creation, and they're not there to create wealth for you. They're there to create economic opportunity and activity. I think it's one of the reasons why so much funding and grant funds are focused on manufacturing, because of the opportunities that creates, the impact that creates, and the extent of a manufacturing facility. It has so many touch points upstream and downstream on the value chain. There's the opportunity to export products. You're talking about employing a number of people. You're talking about skills transfer. So when you look at property development, it's not so much the case. I mean, yes, there are jobs that are created to build something.
Yeah.
In that moment, those jobs are created. But ultimately, at the end of the day, let's say you're building a strip mall or you're building a residential property project. It is wealth creation at the end of the day.
Sure. That's that's rough, because it is still, I mean, a lot of activity happens in property.
Absolutely.
Including the manufacturing. But yes, it might be viewed, in that aspect. So maybe not that top of the, food chain in terms of the priority areas.
But there is still a lot of funding available. And I think it's about really, ensuring that a project has its elements in place.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, a project is simply not ready to go out and get funders. And understanding what those elements are in terms of being ready. An idea is great, but an idea can't be funded. A lot of businesses will come to us and say, I want to do student accommodation. University of whatever. WITS needs more student accommodation. I don't know if WITS does or not. It's usually, your universities in your other provinces. But, whatever university or Technicon needs more accommodation, they don't have enough student accommodation.
Yeah.
So we would like to build it. Okay, but what work has been done to determine where's the land? How many students actually need? Have you engaged with NSFAS to say, how much would you be willing to pay towards? A lot of that has not been done. It's a matter of saying, I see an opportunity, I want people to come on board, and then those people must help me build the idea. And that's also not feasible. If you want to go out and get investors, you need to entice them with an opportunity, not an idea. And that requires building. Okay. That requires time. That requires research.
And in terms of, enterprise and supplier development programs, how much sustainability do we see in businesses that have gone through ESD, post the ESD program itself, that are sustainable on their own?
Are you talking about, when you say ESD, are you talking about incubator type programs, or are you talking about receiving ESD funding as or some sort of other ESD? So ESD is so big, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's so many ways corporates, multinationals, measured entities can support SMEs and suppliers.
Actually both. I mean, there's a case to be made for actually, investing in a business through, ESD funding. But when you then have an incubator element within, that funding that allows that business to plug into the supply chains, within various corporates. So instead of just giving them money and walking away, but actually giving them money and taking them by the hand to ensure that they grow through this incubated environment. So beyond that, do we see a success in terms of, sustainability now, where they actually have to go and fend for themselves outside of this incubated environment?
We see both. There are always going to be those businesses that will go into an incubated environment and really take advantage of that opportunity. Of course, some incubators are better than others. Some offer better access to market or access to finance or whatever it might be. I think what's really important, and where we see good results when we engage with businesses, is those incubators that are specialized.
Okay.
So, not an incubator that just looks at any type of business, but looks at specific types of businesses and actually has relationships to get them in touch with potential customers, so supply chains, etc.
Mm.
A lot of the time, I think that the corporate market needs to better understand SMEs. So they're providing funds towards supporting these SMEs through incubators, but they're not willing to take these SMEs on as suppliers yet. They want them to get to a certain point. That being said, these measured entities also have businesses to run, so they have to ensure that who they bring on board is going to be able to supply them, that they can rely on them. So it's not an easy space. I think there are things within ESD that can certainly be done better.
Yeah.
I know that where we have assisted some ESD beneficiaries of listed companies, we've achieved fantastic results. That was where a measured entity came to us and said, we've got this beneficiary we want to support.
Yes.
They're doing well, but they need a little bit extra support and they need to raise capital elsewhere. We've been supporting them with funding here and there, but they need to get on that path to independence. How can you assist? And so what we did is we went in there and we did an analysis of what it would take for them to raise capital elsewhere.
Yeah.
Would they be able to? We determined that there were things that needed to be addressed. We did what we call a finance readiness audit, where we determine how ready are you to go and raise finance.
All right.
In that, we determined that there were gaps, and then we started working with them to close and fix those gaps. And the measured entity, supported by paying for our services. What we've done over a period of approximately 2 years now with that client is we've raised them. Sure, I'd need to do the calculations in my head, but we've raised them probably well in excess of 200 million rand by now. We're doing additional capital raising. So, at the end of the day, this business had generally speaking, what it needed to raise capital. But through its financial records, through its operations, through the way it was showing its business to funders, it wasn't able to unlock that funding. We went in and we started working with them to restructure that. We didn't change the business, but we structured it in a way that a financier could look at it and understand where the opportunity lay, where they were going to, where if there were risks, how they would be mitigated. We worked with that business to put all of those processes in place.
Okay. And how long would we say is a reasonable period to have a company in an ESD program?
I can't answer that question. I don't run ESD programs. I think each company needs to be looked at on its own merits. A big part of success is also the jockey, though. A lot of SMEs go into these incubators, and all they do is incubator jump, incubator hop. They're 6 months here, they finish that, then they go a year somewhere else, they finish that. So they never really do come out of that SME space, and they're constantly relying. I find that reliance on someone else to make them successful. At the end of the day, it's your business. If you want it to be successful, you need to go out there. It's on you to make it successful. It can't be someone else.
Ooh. Sure, and that's true. And a lot of businesses. So you will find that a business does a range of things, right? Offers a range of services or even products. Do we find that there is it better to be focused or to diversify?
Again, you're asking me questions that it could be either. It could be either. There's an argument for diversification where it's relevant, and there's an argument for focus where it's relevant. Diversification makes sense where now you're looking for you've got something going and now you're looking to grow further.
Yeah.
There's a difference between diversification and just trying a whole lot of things.
Yeah, I do everything.
And I think that's where the difference lies. Diversification is a thought. It's something that's thought about. It's structured. It's intentional. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. So
diversification is intentional.
The next logical step is to move, to that.
Whether it's within the same thing or whether it's completely different, but there's some sort of. It's intentional. Research or or analysis or something has been done to say this diversification makes sense.
Yeah.
But to go, I just do everything, that's not diversification. That's just being, trying to get a customer in any way you can almost. And what that does is it creates a sense of scattered thought. There isn't structure around what it is you're actually doing and how you're going to do it.
Yeah, and focusing your resources, I guess, everywhere.
Including energy.
Sure. So if we're going back then to your family business, it comes to a point where you're not able then to raise funds for it, and the business has to close down. How was that process? Because I mean, it happens often than not, where we actually have a number of businesses that have been previously, very successful, and it gets to a point where the business needs to close down. What did that process look like? What did it do, for the family?
Well, I mean, goodness, it took us almost, it felt like square one. And again, this concept of diversification is important, but what are you diversifying into? And understanding the implications. And unfortunately, I think we didn't diversify enough, possibly. So again, that question of do you or don't you? And so we sort of had all our eggs in one basket. And we found ourselves in a tough spot. I mean, a lot of reflection and contemplation. I don't wish that sort of scenario on anyone, closing down a business on that basis. And a big part and a big struggle for us was the fact that, I mean, we had to let a lot of people go.
Oh.
We hired over 270 odd people.
And that's 270 families, not just people, because
Correct.
Each of those people is probably taking care of 4 or 5 people in their household.
100%. And we were predominantly, or majority, blue collar. So, it really, it has an impact, and very important to keep in mind, what the implications of not doing things, or not doing things right. It's not that things were done wrong.
Yeah.
It's just that there wasn't necessarily a plan on growth.
Yeah.
Growth was organic, and it just happened. But growth also requires investment. Growth requires money. Growth requires time. And so understanding that and where and how all of that is going to play together is important.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Now, before we close, we have a question that came from the guest that that sat in your seat before you, and it actually speaks to, well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that you can speak to. What more should be done to transform the South African economy?
Gosh, what more should be done?
And I think in context, this particular guest works in an environment where they drive transformation. They just focus, on creating that inclusion of Black business generally in the economy, and, feeling that probably our economy is not transformed enough. So
I absolutely agree that our economy isn't transformed enough.
Not even close.
Not even close. And we see that, in fact, with some of the funds that are available in the market. So a fair amount of what we do, and a specialization we have, is grant funding from government, predominantly from the DTIC. And there are certain funds that require minimum contributions or minimum inputs to be procured from Black-owned businesses. And that can't be achieved because our economy in certain industries isn't transformed at all, or to any number that's worth mentioning, really. So what can be done to transform the economy? I don't know that there's one simple answer. I do think that how enterprise and supplier development is administered, is run, is structured, needs to be revisited to a certain degree. I don't necessarily know that this funding is having the impact that it needs to have. And to a great degree, there needs to be a view to say, if we want Black businesses to be successful, we need to provide them with the support to achieve that success. We need to remember that most Black businesses are probably the first in their families to be in business for themselves. So there is no historical anything of how to run a business. There were no dinner conversations of what it means to run a business. Understanding basic concepts of business is lacking. And if we can educate the right businesses on what it means to be sustainable and viable, I think that will make a very big difference.
And with you and your sister, I mean, having grown then in this family business that spanned over, decades, how early and how immersed were you or exposed into the basics of running a business? And would that have been different if you were just trained at a school for entrepreneurship?
Absolutely, it would be different. So, I mean, growing up, school holidays, if we were in town, we were in the shop. I mean, we couldn't sit at home and watch TV all day. So, I mean, we worked the floor. We helped customers pack their purchases. We, those pricing guns, we priced tins of food on the shelves. And then as we grew up, we did some administrative work. So we understood that there's a lot to running a business. And I certainly do believe that did play a role. We were fortunate to be, in meetings now and then where we were exposed to interesting business discussions. So certainly that played a role. And without a doubt, it gave us certain perspective. Being in the family business and certainly going through what we went through in terms of closing down the business, that was probably what taught us the most.
Sure.
So it was heavy school fees, but at the end of the day, you learn by doing and by being exposed. So school is always theory. Practical is what's important. And again, where I think that what is given to a lot of SMEs is these theoretical workshops and whatnot. What they need is practical hands-on support.
Okay, so if you take us through, what exactly would a business expect when they walk through your doors? What kind of support would they get from you?
First and foremost, what we do is we determine whether or not at a high level, a business there is funding in the market for a business. So a company would reach out to us in whatever way they get hold of us. They would give us a little bit of information. We'd have a brief discussion around their project. And based on the information we receive, everything from, the stage of the business to the industry to the type of project and intervention they're looking to put in place to the team that they have, we would then say, yes, we believe there is funding available. And I think it's important to say we do not work with every funder in the market. Right? We work with a specific group of funders, or rather we have a network of funders, over 40 funders in South Africa, everything from government to commercial to alternative to private equity. And what we do is we help a business first understand what funding is available for them in the market. We then undertake a process where we evaluate how ready they are to go to funding. So we don't just hear the idea and go, okay, let's write up a business plan and submit it, because how much has actually been put into that case as well as how much of the actual business and the business owners has been evaluated to say, should we be going for this funding yet? Are we ready to do so? And I will guarantee you that most funding applications fail because they are not ready to go to funding. So what we then do is we do that analysis. We've got something we call a finance readiness audit. We actually run a 4-phase process to get businesses to an application. We do an analysis. We determine what the gaps are, what the red flags are that funders would raise that we want to address and we want to close or resolve. We look at what some of the interventions or additional information or better information is needed. We then undertake a process of consultation and advisory. We work with that business to close the gaps, address the red flags, restructure if things need to be restructured, rebuild if things need to be rebuilt. And in that, we build the financial model to determine viability.
Okay.
Because in many businesses' minds, the idea, and rightfully so, the idea is profitable. But when you start putting that down and really working out the numbers, and that's what we do, we help them really work out the numbers, that viability starts to get tested. And so we determine the viability, we determine the sustainability, and through that then the bankability. The bankability meaning are funders going to come to the table.
Okay.
And how long that takes is really, how long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
There have been businesses, we have managed to figure that out within literally 2 weeks. There are businesses which 2 years later we still are working to put things in place so that we can actually go to a funder.
Okay.
Once we've got all of those elements in place, then we can prepare an application. What we do is, in terms of where we're going to apply for funding, we get together with those business owners. We inform them of what it means to get the specific type of funding we're speaking about. We then prepare applications for that specific funder, funding. We don't spray and pray. It's important to ensure that we're applying to the right funder for the right fund, for the right project. And then we facilitate that process where we can, which is the case with most lenders. We sit with our clients in credit committees to help them explain the financial aspects and that viability of the project. We take them through that process of ensuring that they are considering their agreements with the financial institution, what the implications thereof are. We help them with their capital structuring. We help them with that whole process. So we really do get involved. We don't do capital raising from the perspective of, you tell me your project, I go write up a plan, and then, you can go and submit it. We really do partner with businesses because, like I said, our opinion of success is not an approval letter from a funder. Our opinion of success is an approval letter that you can then draw down funding on, implement a project, and several years down the line still see that happening. And we are very happy to say that with all of our clients, that has been the case.
Sure. That's amazing. That was very insightful. And it's important, I think, for businesses to be a part of that process, because I guess if you are the ones who go and you run through, these applications on behalf of the businesses, they will never get to a point where they understand, what it means. I mean, just like you said, even if you've got an accountant in the business, make sure that you understand, what the accountant is actually doing on your behalf, so that you have got a holistic picture of what your business is looking like. All right, there we have it. That was very insightful. I am certainly educated, informed, and definitely inspired. And I hope that you were too. And if you were, please share this podcast so that we have more people who are actually following, subscribing, and liking this podcast, because we aim to educate, to empower, to inform, and to inspire you along your property journey, and certainly your business journey as well. Thank you for your time, Zahra.
Thank you very much for having me.